Hi, everyone. Welcome to week one of the course on Zines and Library Spaces. I'm very excited to spend the next 6 weeks with you all. So for Module 1, today's presentation will be Zines as Material Culture. So before I get started, I just want to give my land acknowledgement. So I acknowledge the original inhabitants and unceded traditional village sites of the land my home is occupying and built upon, which is the Namkeg tribe of the Massachusetts Pawtucket Nation. I take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land, past, present, and future. So I'm Dawn Stahura. I'm going to be working with you all for this summer session. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a research and instruction librarian for the sciences and the health sciences, and I'm also the zine librarian at Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts. I actually graduated from IUPUI with my Master in Library Science in 2009, so I am an alumna. I'm originally from Indiana and moved out to Massachusetts in 2011 for my first professional librarian job, which was at Wellesley College. And from there, I was at Simmons University, and now I am at Salem State. I've been creating zines since 1992 and have tabled at zine fests all across the country. And I wholeheartedly believe that our stories matter and do change the world. And I think zines are magical and just a fantastic way to build community. So I've been fortunate to work with different organizations over the years, bringing zines into their programming. So I host a monthly zine club for kids at my local public library. I've done zines with art therapy programs, working with at-risk teens. I used to do zine workshops every summer for Girls Rock Campaign, which was a nonprofit focused on building self-esteem in young girls. I've done zines with survivor groups, sharing narratives as a way of healing. And then I've gone and worked with some senior citizens as a way to share memories and stories. And so I'm hoping throughout the 6 weeks that you will be able to see where zines can fit either in your current situation. So maybe you're working at a library at the moment, or where you might like to bring zines into whatever library setting you find yourself in. So this is going to be kind of like a quick kind of overview of zines. You'll see in Module 1, there is a mixture of things to read, things to watch, and things to do. And that will go for every week. We'll have things to see, things to read, and things to do. And so for some kind of common characteristics of zines, they're self-published. I think that's first and foremost. Which means that the person who creates a zine doesn't answer to anyone, which is really radical if you think about it. Any other type of sharing of information, whether that be scholarly journals or there be books or articles in magazines, has to be vetted through someone, whether that be an editor or a publisher. So zines is this taking power into your own hands to share whatever information it is that you need or want to share. Because they're self-published, they are also done in pretty small print runs. Most folks don't have photocopiers in their homes. Copying is expensive, even at colleges and universities, and that's also the same if you go to Staples and try to print your zines, especially in color. So for most folks, we're talking about print runs less than 50 copies. So once they run out, right, they're gone. They're anti-capitalist. So nobody is making a bazillion dollars creating zines. If that were true, I promise you I would not be on this video right now. I would be doing something else with, you know, just chilling out and vibing with my dogs. Um, so if we're not motivated by money, then what are zines motivated by? And this is this idea of sharing stories and pushing against dominant narrative. So what we've seen historically is that when folks find themselves in the margins of society, and in a moment I'll show you a timeline, we have seen zines and forms of zines show up as a way to disseminate information. So either that's dissemination of information about what's going on in their community, issues that are important to them, or it can also be pushing against stereotypes and misinformation. I can think of a particular group like the Black Panther Party wanting to kind of dispel the myth that they were this like uber militant group, and share information about actually what they were doing in communities and what they stood for. In this country, of course, we have a dominant narrative. I think we kind of all know what that looks like. In case some folks have no idea, we're talking about the dominant narrative being white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual, Christian in some capacity, middle class. And so if you don't see yourself in that narrative, then you are on the margins of that narrative. Zines are low budget. So the beautiful thing about zines is that you can make one with a piece of paper and a writing utensil. There is no special equipment or knowledge needed in order to make a zine. Certainly if you have access to like a Rizzo machine, or you know how to use Adobe Suite, that's amazing. And you can certainly do that. And there are lots of really super polished and professional looking zines out there. But for the most part, people are just, you know, cutting and pasting and putting their zines together in a very lo-fi kind of aesthetic. And then lastly, zines kind of operate under this ethos of for us, by us, for us. So if you don't see your story being represented or being represented accurately and fairly in mainstream media, then you take that power and you tell the story the way it should be told. So this is, of course, not an exhaustive timeline of zines, but this is the timeline and how I choose to sort of present zines. Oftentimes, folks will say that zines started in the 1930s with science fiction fanzines, which is the precursor to fanfic. And while folks were certainly making zines in the 1930s, my problem with that is that it often centers white male voices, and I find that hard to believe that there were no zines being produced before the 1930s. And in fact, we can trace it back all the way to the 1830s with the American anti-slavery abolitionist pamphlets. Also in the 1920s, we had the Harlem Renaissance Little Magazine movement. The 1960s, which I mentioned in the previous slide, the Black Panther Party. The 1970s, the punk movement, both musical and political, all the way up until today. So you will have access to these slides in the Canva page. So if you want to learn more about any of these groups, you can click on everything here is hyperlinked and it'll take you out. So for example, if you click on the Black Panther Party, it actually goes into a digitized archive of their work. And so that you can check out more about these groups and the types of zines that they were creating. So if the media gets to decide who the experts are, okay, and we know that this is true in mainstream media where there are faces and the voices of particular movements, we get to see the same sort of quote unquote experts on, you know, the CNN or NBC or whatever, right? That become the experts of things that are happening either politically or socially. So if mainstream media gets to decide who the experts are, then that also means that they are controlling semantics. For example, this could be referring to folks as illegal aliens instead of non-citizens. If you've taken a cataloging class yet, you may have talked about subject headings and some of the inherent biases that are in the Library of Congress subject headings. Like, for example, when we talk about Native Americans, indigenous people in the United States, we do not refer to the sort of like extermination of them. We do not refer to that as genocide in the Library of Congress subjects heading. We call it crimes against. Also, if you're using like the Dewey Decimal, so you're working at a public library, the indigenous spirituality is often housed in the mythology section. So semantics definitely matter. And if you've not done any work on this yet, like if you took a cataloging class, but you really didn't do a deep dive into subject headings, that might be something to think about. There is a particular name, Sandy Berman, who is sort of like the rock star of, kind of petitioning the Library of Congress to make changes in subject headings and wordings. For example, again, like we still refer to sex workers as prostitutes in the Library of Congress subject heading. So semantics definitely, and there are experts at the Library of Congress level, so it's not just mass media. And this also gets filtered into the way that we talk about people and situations in the news. It also means that the media gets to amplify dominant narratives, which in turn uphold the status quo. They get to silence stories. So, for example, there's a reason why mass shootings that involve Black victims don't get the same media coverage as incidences that happen where the majority of victims are white. So there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes, I guess, that oftentimes people aren't aware of. And then it also means that, mass media can push specific agendas that the general population is not even aware of. And there is a very kind of sinister group called the Sinclair Broadcasting Group that own all of the news station affiliates. So like there's an ABC of Houston and an ABC of Indianapolis and an ABC of Boston. So those are all affiliates of the parent company ABC. A Sinclair Broadcasting Group owns those affiliates, and they have very strict guidelines into how stories can be told, how that news can be covered. And there are scripts that are sent out to all of the affiliates. So there is very little wiggle room for the TV anchor or the journalist or whatever to talk about these situations or stories because it is controlled by this group. So I put this out there because if we're going to talk about zines pushing against the dominant narrative, then we need to sort of position where zines fit in and why they are so important for marginalized groups. If this is how we get our information in public spheres. So expertise is vetted, expertise is earned, and there is a huge spectrum of knowledge, and each of us can be a novice at one thing and an expert of another. And that's true for all of us. And what's really beautiful and powerful about zines is that it allows anyone to claim expertise over their own lived experiences. And that is a fact. And depending on the communities in which you are bringing zines into, that can really be a very liberating experience. And it might be the first time that someone feels like they have the agency to talk about their lived experiences or their community or kind of what they know from just living in the world. And it might be the first time that they feel like they're taken seriously. And so I just want to just kind of make sure that we all sort of sit with that for a moment, that we are all experts of our own lived experiences. So, yes. So, these are kind of like the 6 big things that I think why zines are so important and why bringing zines into community spaces and libraries in particular is so important. So it really gives power back to the people because they can be producers of information. So most of us passively consume information, right? We're doom scrolling, we're looking at TikToks and, snaps and whatever else. We're just consuming it. We're not really critiquing it in any way. Um, when you create a zine, you are producing information and you're putting it out there into the world. And it's giving folks an opportunity to critique and question authority. And that is a big deal, especially when we think about double marginalized groups. So if we're thinking about like young Black teens, right, being able to produce information that questions kind of the establishment is pretty important. Folks get to be an expert of their own lived experiences, and oftentimes that lived experience is at odds with the dominant ways of representing information, and it's also at odds and kind of the dominant way of knowing. Traditionally in this country, we value the written word over oral histories, but there are certainly many different groups of folks whose history is definitely orally based. And that is just as valid. And so sort of recognizing that there are many different ways of obtaining information and knowledge and sharing that knowledge. Zines are just one way to tell a story, and stories matter. We have seen this, all kinds of social justice movements and activism where once folks start sharing their experiences, other folks get empowered to share their experiences, connections are made, communities are made, movements start to happen. We are just as people interested in hearing other people's stories. And zines is just one way where those stories can get shared. The personal is political. This will come up specifically in the module, the one we'll talk about the ethics of zines and sort of like challenges and stuff that you might come across if you're working in a public library setting. Because everything we do is political, right? You sitting here this moment listening to this presentation is a political act. If education wasn't political, then we wouldn't be worried about critical race theory or kind of rewriting in some of the red states like Florida, where we are going to rewrite the way we talk about slavery. If education wasn't political, then we wouldn't have an issue with trying to ban books and censorship, right? So we know as librarians and aspiring librarians that information is most definitely political. And so when folks make zines, they're able to, that could be their form of activism. That could be their form of being politically engaged. Zines don't necessarily have to be political, although I will argue that simply by existing, they are political, because we existing as people are political. I mean, it's a political act in just existing. Zines get to critically evaluate information. So that can be mainstream media, it could be museums, it could be textbooks, it could be, the canon, right? Why do we always have to read like Hemingway and whatever, Edgar Allan Poe and Mark Twain? Why can't we read, somebody else? And zines get to creatively push against oppression in all its forms. And then lastly, zines build community. I have made so many amazing friends through trading zines, meeting people at zine fests, being on a panel with other zine librarians. Zines help build empathy, and it also shows that you're not alone. that oftentimes we might feel like, and our patrons might feel like, they're the only ones that are experiencing this particular thing. Um, and zines are just one way to sort of open that door and say, hello, friend, like, you're not the only one that feels, squashed, by whatever the issue is, climate change. I'm feeling it too. And that's, I think, just a really powerful and really, oh, I, powerful is like the word that's coming to my mind, but I feel like it's more than that. Um, because there's strength in knowing that you're not alone. So I want to give you a couple of definitions because you may find these throughout some of the materials that you read for this course, and you might also hear me say it. So zines kind of fall under this this kind of category of open pedagogy. And what we mean by that is simply creations that can be assessed and shared with a limitless audience outside of a classroom. Now, I use classroom because that's where I'm situated in as a public or as a academic librarian, but the classroom literally can be anywhere where instruction is happening, right? So if you are leading a workshop in a public library, if you are a school librarian, you're an archivist at a nonprofit, it doesn't matter. A classroom is literally just where learning is happening. The idea is that the thing that you're creating can live outside of the classroom. It can be shared and assessed. Open pedagogical projects reduce barriers that prevent equitable access, facilitates connections across the boundaries of learning experiences and viewpoints, allows for ownership of one's own lived experiences, and interrogates the status quo's false narrative that information and the dissemination of information is neutral. So you probably know this, and you probably, hopefully, have heard this in your library career thus far. But if not, I will just maybe be the first person to tell you that libraries are not neutral. The end. Information is not neutral. The end. So when we talk about zines as open pedagogy, what we mean is that they can be shared. There isn't any kind of barrier that prevents someone from making copies of their zine and giving it out to their friends or giving them out to community members, which is very different than writing like a research paper, for example, where really only the student creating the paper and the professor is going to read it. These have a life outside the classroom. Zines are also part of participatory literacy. So participatory literacy recognizes that we can all produce information that engages with a larger audience. It recognizes that the dominant narrative is hella biased and makes space for understanding information within a personal and sometimes emotional context. We are emotional beings. So yes, information can be extremely emotional. It gives students or patrons permission to claim expertise over their lived experiences, something that is a rarity in most people's lives, whether that be their academic career or wherever else that they're out in the world. It implies a certain amount of discomfort, uncertainty, calling in and calling out. Anytime that we invite participants to talk about personal things, there is going to be this sort of aura of the unknown, right? We don't know what people are going to share. We don't know what'll get brought up. We don't know how that changes the energy in the room. So yes, there will be this uncertainty, which can cause everybody a little bit of discomfort because you don't really know. But zines are one way to help facilitate the breaking down of barriers and providing a space for people to be vulnerable and share whatever it is that they're called to share. And then zines set a little fire to antiquated and frankly patriarchal ways of knowing. When I work with students, they're always like, let's burn down the whole educational system. And it's like, well, we can't do that because we need we need sort of some of these mechanisms at place. I can complain about the Library of Congress subject headings, and while they, yes, are problematic, they also serve a purpose. And we need to have organization of information and a way to kind of classify all of this stuff. So while we can't burn the whole thing down, what we can do is set a tiny fire. And I'm a firm believer that things that happen on the micro level can and do influence things that happen at a micro level. So sometimes we just have to start small. And then lastly, zines are part of what I call critical creativity. So critical creativity is really just having the space and the tools to take something apart and not even physically take it apart, right? To look at something, whether that be a situation, look at a particular piece of research, to look at things that are happening in your community, take a look at it, take it apart, think about how this affects you personally, and then put it all back together in a way that now can reach a broader audience. And what I have found working with students is that, particularly with research, is if they spend all this time investigating their research topic, reading things about it, then thinking about how that impacts them personally, and then putting that all together to create their zine, they know their topics more than they would have just had they searched the databases and found some articles, because there's something about that personal, and there's something about the intent in order to share this to a broader audience that makes all the difference. So lastly, as we move through the course, is to think about kind of where you are currently or where you hope to be employed. And the question that I always ask folks are, where are the gaps? There's clearly gaps, whether that be gaps in the collection, gaps in the programming, gaps in outreach, gaps in marketing. You can fill them with zines. And that can be, maybe you make a zine, a mini zine about what your library has to offer to non-English speaking patrons. Maybe you make a mini zine about the different story time events that happen, like through this, like during the month of July or whatever. The options are endless. So just thinking about gaps and how zines might help bridge a gap. So welcome to week 1. You'll see that there are 3 discussion posts this week. Don't panic. They're kind of just getting to know each other. Why are you here? Why are you interested in zines? And then you'll be making your first mini zine. Spoiler alert, you'll be making zines in this class. And then I also have a quiz, which is not really a quiz, but I am just asking if folks want an optional Zoom meeting. It doesn't have to be every week. Maybe where we all get together and we can ask questions of me or each other, or we can just use that time to talk about the readings, talk about how we're feeling about all of this, make our mini zines together, whatever. So I invite you to fill out that quiz just so that I can gather some information. And then if you have any questions at all, feel free to just email me through our course page. And other than that, I'm really excited to be teaching this class, and I'm really excited to talk about zines with you all. Okay. All right. Until next week.